There are entire cities in Canada with hospitals, shopping malls, swimming pools, and hockey arenas that have been empty for decades. Streets with working fire hydrants, houses still furnished, calendars on the walls frozen on the month everyone left. Beneath Canada's reputation as one of the world's most livable countries sits a quieter history. Boomtowns that went bust overnight, communities cleared by government policy, places lost to geology. From the contaminated shores of Great Bear Lake to the fog-wrapped coastline of Newfoundland, the country is scattered with places that were actively erased. Some of these ghost towns you can drive to on a paved road. Others require a chartered aircraft, a boat, or hours of pushing through overgrowth. Port Radium, Northwest Territories. The nearest road ends 450 kilometers to the south. You can only get in by chartered aircraft. What waits when you land is silence, subarctic rock, and the faint geological memory of a decision that shaped the 20th century. In 1930, a prospector named Gilbert Labine spotted an unusual streak of color along the eastern shore of Great Bear Lake. Pitchblende, dense with uranium. Within a decade, this isolated patch of wilderness had become part of the Manhattan Project supply chain. The ore extracted here helped build the atomic bomb. The Dean people of the nearby community of Deline didn't know that. They were hired as ore carriers, hauling heavy burlap sacks of radioactive material across a 2,100-kilometer route that would later become known as the Highway of the Atom. They ate beside the sacks. They slept next to them. Some used the burlap to make clothing for their children. The mine closed in 1982. The Canadian government did not formally acknowledge the health impacts on Deline residents until the early 2000s, nearly 2 decades after the last worker left. More than $80 million has since gone toward partial site remediation. Partial. The contamination remains. So does the lake. Where Port Radium kept its damage quiet, the next place announced it from the welcome sign. Uranium City, Saskatchewan. Uranium City, Saskatchewan, yes. That was its actual name. At its peak in 1979, roughly 5,000 people lived here. There was a hospital, a hockey arena, a bowling alley, a full school system, a downtown core. Workers were earning some of the highest wages available anywhere in Canada. This was a real city, built entirely around a single radioactive element. The Cold War built Uranium City. An accident in Pennsylvania started its collapse. On March 28, 1979, a cooling failure at the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant in the United States triggered a partial meltdown and a global crisis of confidence in nuclear energy. Uranium prices fell sharply. Investment dried up. The math stopped working. In June 1982, Eldorado Nuclear announced it was shutting down operations. Within months, 90% of the population was gone. Not gradually, gone. Textbooks were still on desks when the high school closed. Houses were left fully furnished. Street signs, traffic lights, and fire hydrants still stand on streets that no longer lead anywhere. The complete infrastructure of a functioning city simply left where it stood. Today, somewhere between 70 and 100 people remain, mostly seasonal, reachable only by small aircraft or a winter ice road that exists for a few months each year. Radioactive waste from decades of mining operations sits in the surrounding land, with cleanup still ongoing and incomplete. Walking through Uranium City is an encounter with what happens when a society decides, almost overnight, that it no longer needs you. Uranium City decayed on its own schedule. The next place was preserved, deliberately, for reasons that still don't fully make sense. Kitsault, British Columbia. In 2004, an Indian-American businessman named Krishnan Suthanthiran paid approximately $7 million for an entire ghost town on the coast of northern British Columbia. He has kept it maintained ever since. The power has never been turned off. Caretakers walk the streets every day. The swimming pool still holds clean water. This is Kitsault. In 1981, the Phelps Dodge Corporation spent $32 million building a complete modern community from scratch on the shores of Alice Arm Inlet. roughly 140 kilometers north of Prince Rupert. 92 single-family homes, 200 apartment units, a shopping mall with a grocery store and a bank, a curling rink, a hospital, a school, a swimming pool, tennis courts, everything 1,200 residents could need, built in a remote coastal inlet, accessible only by boat or float plane. Then, molybdenum prices crashed. The mine closed. Residents were given 90 days to leave. By April of that year, Kitsoe was completely empty. Furniture was left in place. Food was left in refrigerators. Calendars on the walls still show 1983. Suthan has proposed converting Kitsoe into a resort, a retirement community, and a liquefied natural gas hub. None of it has materialized. Instead, the town continues, maintained, empty, waiting for a purpose that has not arrived. Walking its streets feels like stepping sideways out of time. Kitsoe was preserved by one man. The next region had hundreds of its communities dismantled by something more organized: government policy. The Newfoundland resettlement communities. Between 1954 and 1975, the governments of Canada and Newfoundland paid people to abandon their homes. Were cleared under a household resettlement program that relocated over 28,000 Newfoundlanders to designated growth centers along the coast. The financial offers ranged from $1,000 to $3,000 per household. If enough of a community voted in favor, everyone had to go, regardless of how you personally voted. These were not failed settlements. Many had thrived for generations, sustained by the cod fishery, shaped by isolation into something distinct. Their dialects, their architecture, their relationship with the sea, all of it had developed over hundreds of years in these small coves and inlets. All of it was considered expendable in the name of economic modernization. Some families floated their houses across the bay rather than leave them behind. Others watched buildings burn, torched to prevent anyone from coming back. Premier Joey Smallwood captured the official philosophy in a phrase he repeated often: "Burn your boats. There is no turning back." Today, more than 300 abandoned communities dot the Newfoundland coastline. Family names are still legible on weathered headstones in cemeteries no one maintains. Clearings in the coastal forest mark where entire towns once stood. Each summer, descendants return for what they call come-home events. They gather in the places their grandparents were paid to leave, stand in the clearings where houses used to be, and listen to the Atlantic. The next story is more deliberate still. A corporation closed a town and then erased it. Cassia, British Columbia, a functioning community of 1,500 people, torn apart in a matter of months. Buildings crushed, burned, or trucked away. The land swept bare. The cause was not war. In Cassiar, British Columbia, it was an asbestos company. In 1951, the Cassiar Asbestos Corporation built a complete company town in the remote northwest of the province. A school, a recreation center, a curling rink, a ski hill, and family housing. Workers had built lives here across decades. Children grew up, people retired. Then global asbestos prices collapsed, accelerated sharply by mounting evidence that the material caused mesothelioma, lung cancer, and a cascade of other terminal diseases. In 1992, the corporation closed the mine. Workers were given 3 to 4 weeks to pack their lives and leave. Then company crews moved in. The hospital came down. The school came down. The shopping center was leveled. Houses were crushed or burned. Within months, nearly every structure that had made up this community had been reduced to rubble, then cleared away entirely. Drive the Stuart Cassia Highway today, and you will pass through the footprint of what was once a living town without seeing almost any trace of it. The land was cleared, but the tailings pond, containing millions of tons of asbestos-laden waste, remains on site. It will remain a concern for thousands of years. The The town was gone in months. The waste will be there for millennia. Not far away, another British Columbia community vanished a different way. It was swallowed by the forest. Aniox, British Columbia. Aniox shows how thoroughly wilderness can reclaim a place. In 1914, the Granby Consolidated Mining Company built a copper smelting operation on Observatory Inlet in northern British Columbia. It was one of the largest copper smelters in the British Empire. At its peak, Aniox was home to roughly 2,500 people. Workers, families, teachers, nurses, merchants, all living in a self-contained company town, accessible only by sea. The smelter ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The sulfur dioxide it produced was so thick and so toxic that it stripped the surrounding hillsides of nearly every tree and plant within miles of the site. And a thriving industrial town sitting at their base. Then the ore ran out. In 1935, the mine closed. Aniox was abandoned, and that is when the forest came back. It came back fast and hard. By the time access to the inlet improved enough for visitors to reach the site, the vegetation had already consumed most of what remained. Today, the forest is so dense that people who don't know where to look can walk within meters of ruins without seeing them. Collapsed concrete foundations, rusted machinery, the remnants of smokestacks, all buried under decades of undergrowth. Ground that was once too poisoned to grow anything is now so dense it has buried its own history. Aniox is accessible only by boat, and the access is difficult. Those who make the effort stand in a forest, knowing what the photographs show, and knowing what is buried under their feet. If Aniox was consumed slowly, the next place was consumed in 90 seconds. Frank Slide, Alberta. In the morning on April 29, 1903, approximately 82 million tons of limestone broke away from the summit of Turtle Mountain in southwestern Alberta and landed on the town of Frank below. It took 90 seconds. Around 70 people were killed. The exact number has never been confirmed because many bodies were never recovered. They were buried beneath roughly 30 meters of rock that now covers 3 square kilometers of the Crowsnest Pass Valley floor. The river was dammed. The rail line was buried. Part of the town of Frank ceased to exist in a few minutes. Driving through the Crowsnest Pass today, you encounter a field of massive angular limestone boulders stretching to the horizon in every direction. It looks like the surface of another planet. The interpretive center at the site tells the full story. The mining company that ignored early warnings about Turtle Mountain's unstable geology, the Blackfoot name for the mountain that translated roughly as the mountain that moves, and the survivors who stumbled out of the rubble in the cold dark of an April night, looking back at where their neighborhood had been. East of the mountains is another kind of boom, built on silver that came out of the ground almost pure. Cobalt, Ontario. In the summer of 1903, the same year Turtle Mountain fell on Frank, a blacksmith named Fred LaRose threw his hammer at what he thought was a fox near his railway work camp in northern Ontario. He missed the fox. His hammer struck a rock. The rock turned out to be almost pure silver. Within a decade, it had produced more silver than almost anywhere else on Earth. The cobalt silver rush was briefly one of the most spectacular mining booms in Canadian history, and the money it generated directly financed the discovery and development of the Porcupine and Kirkland Lake goldfields. Cobalt, in effect, bankrolled Northern Ontario's entire mining economy. The silver didn't last. The veins were rich but narrow. By the 1930s, most of the mines had closed, and cobalt settled into the slow, layered decline you still see today. The town technically survives, with a small population of around 1,100. But it exists in a state of visible, ongoing abandonment. Early 20th century mine infrastructure sits directly alongside the present-day community. Headframes, ore sorting facilities, waste rock piles laced with arsenic and heavy metals, buildings in various states of dignified collapse, all of it within walking distance of homes where people are still living their lives. There is one piece of this story that almost reads as fiction. The cobalt nickel ore that gave the town its name was considered a nuisance byproduct in 1903, too low value to be worth extracting. Today, cobalt is a core component of lithium-ion batteries and electric vehicle technology. The material that was thrown out as waste a century ago is one of the most strategically valuable substances in the global economy. What they threw away is what the world wants now. The infrastructure they built to extract silver is crumbling in the Ontario bush. If cobalt's past sits just under the surface, the next two towns wear theirs in the open. Sandon and Bankhead, two boom towns, two different endings. Electric streetlights installed before Vancouver had them. At its peak, around 5,000 people lived in this remote mountain valley in the Slocan region of British Columbia, roughly 90 kilometers from Nelson. The silver boom was spectacular while it lasted. It did not last long. Prices collapsed in the early 20th century. The miners moved on, and a flood in 1955 eliminated most of what had survived the intervening decades. There's a stranger detail. And parking them in Sandon to restore them. The restoration never happened. Rows of rusting transit buses now sit alongside storefronts from the 1890s, giving the site three distinct layers of abandonment in a single place. Silver Rush ruins, vintage buses, all of it dissolving back into the mountain forest at its own pace. Sandon is accessible by road, which makes it unusually approachable by British Columbia standards. Bankhead tells a different story, in an unlikely setting, inside Banff National Park. In 1903, the Canadian Pacific Railway established a coal mine at the foot of Cascade Mountain and built a town around it that was, by the standards of the time, modern. Municipal water, electricity, and streetlights at a point when Banff itself had none of these things. Around 300 men worked underground at peak operations, extracting an estimated 200,000 tons of coal per year. The problem was the coal. It was brittle. Nearly half of it crumbled to dust before it could reach market. Labour strikes in the early 1920s accelerated the operation's decline, and the Canadian Pacific Railway closed the mine in 1922. Ensuring Bankhead could never be revived in any form. Today, a 1-kilometre interpretive trail passes through the ruins with informational signs. It is among the most accessible ghost town walks in the country, with Cascade Mountain rising directly overhead. The last place on this list is harder to reach, a company town on the rainiest coast in Canada, where the mill closed, the population dissolved, and a small group of people refused to leave. Ocean Falls, British Columbia. There is a particular kind of Canadian stubbornness that you can only appreciate from a distance. Ocean Falls sits on the central coast of British Columbia, wedged between steep mountain walls at the head of a long, deep inlet, accessible only by ferry or float plane. There are no roads connecting it to anywhere. At its peak in the 1960s and early 1970s, roughly 2,500 people lived here, sustained by a Crown Zellerbach paper mill that produced enough pulp and paper to justify its own hospital, hotel, school, ice rink, and one of the few heated outdoor swimming pools in the province. It also receives an average of more than 4,200 millimeters of rainfall per year, making it one of the wettest inhabited places in Canada. Locals had a saying that everyone eventually learns: if you can't see the mountains, it's raining. If you can see them, it's about to rain. The provincial government of British Columbia took over operations briefly, attempting to keep the community alive through the late 1970s with subsidies and managed operations. By 1980, the effort was abandoned. Ocean Falls was effectively decommissioned. Almost everyone left, but not everyone. A small number of residents refused to go. Some stayed for years past the official closure, maintaining what they could. watching what they could not maintain dissolve slowly back into the rain. Today, a community of somewhere between 50 and 70 people persists there, a fraction of what it once was, surrounded by the ruins of what the town used to be. Canada has more than 600 ghost towns in Newfoundland alone. Hundreds more are scattered across British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and the Territories. Each one is a version of the same story told with different details. Something that seemed permanent turned out not to be. A resource ran out, a market collapsed, a government drew a line, a mountain fell. And the people who had built their lives in these places were left to make sense of what came next. What these places share is evidence that ordinary people built something real here, that it mattered, that it ended. The stories remain, if you take the time to find them. Canada's abandoned places are easy to overlook on a map. They are worth seeking out. Each one is a reminder that the communities we take for granted were never guaranteed to last. If you found this video worthwhile, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.